think the first time I watched Millennium Actress was sometime in the early 2000s, around the time that the film was originally released. I remember picking it up at Blockbuster when Japanese animation was a growing storm both in the US at large, as well as in my own personal interests. I was very young at this time, young enough that I honestly can't remember much of my initial viewing of this film. Yet I'm sure that I begged my parents to watch it with me, because until the time that I was in my mid to late teens, I held on to this belief that my parents had any interest in anime at all. I discovered a passion for visual art and drawing from a very early age, and the visuals of Satoshi Kon's films are a huge influence and source of inspiration for me. The gorgeous blend of stylized anime aesthetics with grounded realism both in the characters themselves and in the breathtaking backgrounds of every scene. There are so many shots in these movies that stand alone as masterpiece compositions, let alone the great number of people who worked tirelessly to bring these scenes to life in stunningly fluid and emotive motion. Many revere Ghibli films for having some of the most exquisite hand-drawn animation in the genre's history, and I think Satoshi Kon's work soars to match that level of brilliant animation, whilst turning it on its head in a style that is entirely his. In the same way that you can immediately recognize a Ghibli film, you can recognize a Satoshi Kon film. Each project is a blend of surrealism and experimental storytelling that challenges the medium of animation unlike anything that came before it. Many in the industry truly believe that Kon was decades ahead of his time, and I cannot help but agree. So I must have been between 10 and 13 at the time that I rented this. I can really only remember a few strong visuals, not much of the plot stuck in my mind. Like Chiyoko in the burning castle in the feudal Japan scene. A princess who had just lost her lover, and the white witch who curses her. I remember the music that plays when she stands up, not as a princess, but as a warrior, as her and Ganya ride on horseback through hordes of enemy soldiers towards her lord who had apparently escaped alive. Then there's Chiyoko in the space shuttle. This imagery is the strongest in my mind. The crisp whites and rich oranges, the heavy mood of the scene, and the immersive attention to detail to all of the technology. The sci-fi nature of these scenes stand alone in stark contrast to the tone of the rest of the film. The emotions shared between the characters, I think, were much too sophisticated for me to fully comprehend at the time. But Kon's films have so much going on. There's so many layers of richness. Millennium Actress in particular has this energy to it, more so than any other film I can really think of. It's electric, driving itself forward, sweeping you along with it. I think that's what I most picked up on, despite being so young watching this. When I was a kid, anime was like magic, and all of the magicians I eagerly sat down to watch, Kon performed some of the greatest feats of magic I had ever seen. Grand illusions that blended the impossible together seamlessly. Gorgeous drawings and fluid animation with compelling characters that felt real and complete, even more than characters in most live-action movies and shows. When it was over, I remember my dad thinking it was interesting, praising the visuals mostly and that the soundtrack was pretty cool. My mom wasn't so impressed, and found a lot of the themes and events surrounding Chiyoko upsetting and difficult to watch. I wouldn't realize until much later in my life that my mother wasn't one to watch films where the heroine had a difficult and painful life. I think films like this held up a mirror that wanted to reflect a lot of her own grief and trauma in her own life. Things that were just too painful for her to look back on, but I'll get back to that later. The second time I'd watched Millennium Actress wasn't until the summer between high school and college, and this film proved to be incredibly influential at this time. The soundtrack alone became a solid staple in my listening habits consistently from 2011 to now. Honestly, even just a few weeks ago, I was listening through it while designing characters for a project. I was enrolled in art school in the fall, and I can't remember what made me think of this film again. I hadn't entirely forgotten it, yet it had definitely faded into the back of my mind. I remember getting into watching more and more anime at this time, and I torrented anything and everything that seemed interesting. Watching this a second time, it truly felt like the first, since I remembered so little of when I watched it as a kid. This time, I felt absolutely head over heels in love with this film. I was coming into my own, now an 18-year-old woman, not knowing what my future was to bring, but knowing that being an artist was everything to me. Every aspect of this film, down to the last detail, had me saying to myself, yes, this is anime. This is art. I want to make things like this. I want my visual language to be as articulate and breathtaking as this. Art school was an incredibly tumultuous time in my life. I soared higher than I ever had before, and yet I also felt the cold touch of what it truly meant to reach rock bottom. It was a storm of coming into who I was as a woman. I was a rebellious teenager being forced to transform into a self-sufficient adult. I was trying to reconcile my lofty dreams of being an artist, working on big projects that I was intensely passionate about, with the realities of creative industries and the limits of what I thought I was capable of. It often felt like I had such long roads ahead of me in any direction. I wanted to sprint forward towards any of them, but found it difficult to impossible to get my legs moving. Upon this second viewing, I was Chiyoko. Well, mostly. Unlike her, I had pretty supportive parents who believed in most of my dreams as an artist. Don't get me wrong, my parents, my mom especially, had all the potential to be like Chiyoko's mom. Stern, strict, and very critical of every little thing that I was doing and every choice that I was making. When I was a kid, my parents wanted a very specific life for me, too. But as I got older and didn't follow a single thing they told me to do, I think they quickly realized that there was no stopping me from pursuing what I was passionate about. Against my parents' wishes, I was weird. I was very goth. I was an artist with a bleeding heart and weird tastes. And I was a terrible student who watched too much anime and played way too many video games. I also had just come out as a trans woman that year. I was a rebellious kid, but I had talent. Like Chiyoko, I was more or less scouted when I brought my portfolio of work to a bunch of colleges, receiving a near full ride for one of the biggest schools in the Midwest. My parents kinda had no choice but to trust me and accept who I was. It was that or abandon me completely, and thankfully they loved me too much to do that. So there I was, like Chiyoko, her on the set of her first film and me about to enter my first year of college. We were both big fish, about to be dropped into a pond bigger than anything we'd known before. I related to her journey instantly, and I think that's what really hooked me about this story and why it's become a reoccurring thread in my life. With this second viewing, I also really noticed Ganya for the first time. It was the first time that I honestly realized how attracted to him I was. And I mean, really look at him. He's handsome, he's sweet, and he's an adorable goof. I'm pretty sure no matter who you are, he was written to be instantly lovable. While the film opens with the scene of Chiyoko in one of her later blockbusters, it's Ganya that first truly frames the film in its present-day context. As well as immediately introducing Satoshi Kon's first magic trick, where what is being presented as reality zooms out to reveal its artifice of being a VHS tape playing in a CRT. We're introduced to Ganya by his greatest passion, Japanese cinema, and the earthquake that interrupts his viewing acts as an instant connection between him and Chiyoko, which, as we learn later, she is a tremendously strong force in his life. He's surrounded by a mountain of tapes, presumably his own collection, probably playing them and rewinding them on his CRT until the tapes are degraded, I'm sure. Fully enthralled by their magic, just like anyone watching this film. It's through Ganya that the relationship between viewer and film are connected, and that the central theme of Millennium Actress, a celebration of old Japanese cinema reimagined in the new century through animation, makes itself clear. Ganya is a sentimental character and extremely empathetic, as I think most film lovers are. He's compelled by the passion and emotions of others, getting swept up in their stories and allowing them to inspire his own life. His partner, Kyoji, working with him on the documentary about Chiyoko and the studio she worked with, acts as a great foil that allows the viewer to put Ganya's character into his proper context. See, everything that Ganya does is intensely serious to him. His love for Chiyoko is real, and his passion for her films and how they were made are no different. Yet it's through the presence of Kyoji that allows Ganya the space to not take himself too seriously, and to be cast in a more lighthearted and lovable light to the viewer. Seriously, I can't state enough how effective I find Ganya as a character to be in framing everything together and allowing the audience a focal point for us to connect to, as we all fall down the rabbit hole that is Chiyoko's surreal retelling of her life. The pacing of this film reminds me of a sort of funneling of water. The basis of its plot and all of its characters are all introduced within its first 20 or so minutes, yet as characters are recontextualized over and over through different periods of time and different metaphors of film, mysteries are slowly unveiled one by one, and the plot continues to coalesce and gain in speed as the film goes on. One of these moments where the shift in plot is most noticeable is when Ganya reveals himself to have known Chiyoko personally in the past. Ganya is a fan of Chiyoko even before their meeting on set, and finds himself infinitely enthralled by her from that first moment on. Chiyoko was like a storm, yes, emotionally tumultuous, yet more so in that she's a gust of wind that carries everyone that she meets along with her. There's a force to who Chiyoko is as a woman. There's a trajectory to what she wants and where she's going, and Ganya becomes swept up in her tailwind. His very soul tethers itself to her, refusing to let go even if she doesn't acknowledge him or often forgets him. I think this is because there's something about Chiyoko, something about what she sees and what she's doing, that no one else around them is paying attention to. Chiyoko was both sort of disconnected from reality while chasing the man with the key, yet also sees beyond the mundane that seems to keep everyone around them locked in stasis. There's a bigger picture that she's attuned to, and Ganya is attuned to that as well, and he can't help but be enthralled by her and her energy. Around the same time that we see Ganya being swept up in Chiyoko's life, we, the viewer, realize that we've been swept up along with him. If there's a criticism to be made for the first half of this film having a slow, lingering pace, the same cannot be said for its second half, which gradually gains speed until it climbs to a total sprint towards the story's climax. So, the end of my art school experience didn't have a happy ending. It saw my mother passing away, me dropping out of school and never returning, and me losing the chase with my own man with the key. A man I loved and I wrongfully believed had loved me. At this point in my life, I was Chiyoko, meeting up with the man with the scar that tortured the man that she had been chasing after for so long. But I was also Ganya, where I had stayed behind and had been told that everything that I loved and I was chasing after was dead. As dramatic as it is to say, and as painful as it is to admit, I was Chiyoko, chasing after a man that I thought was everything I wanted and needed, always falling just a bit behind after him and never quite reaching him. It was excruciatingly painful, and at the time, everything that I was me chasing after this love. It wasn't real, it was naive. I wasn't asking myself the questions that I needed to be. Why him? Why right now? Why is it so important? Why throw everything else away? Why keep running? I was running after this guy for about 3 years, so quickly that I couldn't see my surroundings. so quickly that I wasn't ever able to stop. It took me tripping and falling for me to realize what I was even doing. Like Chiyoko, I wanted so badly. I wanted love. I wanted success. Even my own goals were still too sophisticated for me to comprehend at this time. I didn't fully grasp all the things that Chiyoko was saying to me just from the second viewing. There are pieces that she figures out and puts together that I wasn't ready to put together myself yet. There's a lot of subtle, contemplative moments and realizations in this movie, yet I was so swept up by the energy of the film, carried by Chiyoko's wind, that I flew past it all. I was young and so excited, I just wanted to run, just for the sake of it. In the film, Chiyoko's life is tied to earthquakes. One happening in the day that she's born, where her father passes away, and one happening at the present time of this film that ends in her passing. To bring it back, I think it was the same for my mom. The first earthquake for her was when she was in her mid-20s, when her first son died of cancer at just 4 years old. It was a crushing tremor, a rift that split and scarred her in places that I don't think ever came back together again. It saw her first husband transform into an abusive monster, and hospitals becoming a source of such intense trauma that in the next 40 years of her life only saw her return to them twice. The first was when she gave birth to her second son, my older brother, and the last time was when she gave birth to me, never again returning until after she had already passed away. I guess hospitals were like her earthquakes, funnily enough. After my brother was born, it wasn't long until the next earthquake hit. She had married her second husband after becoming pregnant, and not long after he was born, she divorced him and left him to become a single mother. Maybe she recognized patterns of abuse and didn't want to repeat them with him. I'm not really sure. The details may be lost to time at this point. My mother never talked about her past, not even to my dad, and it's hard to put some of these pieces together. Still, 11 years later, she gave birth to me, her last hospital trip while she was alive. Yet in her lifetime, my mother was able to see both of us grow up happy and healthy, both passionate and driven towards our goals, always making her proud. The final earthquake of my mother's life was a sudden major heart attack. It was quick, striking like lightning. My dad was in the shower getting ready for work, and I was still asleep when we both heard her fall. I was there when it happened. I rushed into the room with my dad, not even knowing what was happening. Both of us were there and held her hand when she passed on. But we didn't yet know that she had passed in that moment. We just waited, and the paramedics came and took her to the hospital, and when we were there, it took the doctor telling us that she passed away for it all to sink in, saying that she had developed a heart condition over the course of many years, slowly worsening until it finally claimed her. None of us ever knowing about it because she refused to get checkups or physicals, refused to ever step foot into a hospital if she could avoid it. Anyway, that moment changed everything for me, understandably. But there were so many things I finally understood for the first time. My mother's life wasn't all tragic. She was a highly successful businesswoman. She had a very close relationship with her own mother, my grandmother, and when she was a single mom with my older brother, my grandma watched him while my mom pursued a career. She was fiery, intensely driven, and came to run and manage a major condominium in Chicago. She was also kind and became friends with nearly all of the tenants, though there were probably over 1,000. Seriously, look it up. She managed Imperial Towers in the heart of Chicago by the lake. It's a gorgeous building, and I have amazing memories of visiting her at work there. When she met my dad, he was a humble maintenance worker. She was making a lot more money than him and was a lot more responsible than him. Yet there was a connection, and they genuinely loved each other. And the next 30 years of her life with him would be her happiest. My mother wasn't a timid or quiet person, and she freely spoke her mind. When watching Millennium Actress a second time, I related a lot to the dynamic between Chiyoko and her mother. Mine always had something to say about everything that I did. Every moment was a teaching moment, even when I was in my mid-20s. I related a lot to mothers in films and shows that were overbearing and sometimes overly critical of their daughters. When she passed, I started to unravel her life in my mind, not just as my mother, but as her own person. It became clear to me that my mother was Chiyoko, and if I saw myself as her too, that meant that my mother and I are almost the same person. When I think about my mother when she was in her mid-20s, I realize how similar we are. It's almost like if I look hard enough within myself, that she and I almost exist at the same time, both facing the same problems, the same things lying ahead of us. We're mother and daughter, but we're also sisters, and sometimes we're truly one woman. I can almost feel it. I don't know how else to describe it. The layers of time that flow back and forth and betwixt and between while Chiyoko was telling her story mirrors what I think womanhood can sometimes feel like. The young girl, the woman, and the old crone. Satoshi Kon showed me that they are all the same woman. Most media created by men paints each of these as highly different things. The young woman is pure, innocent, containing no evil, almost waiting to be corrupted. The mature woman is often painted as what womanhood looks like when a man is present in her life. Most media depicts this as the most desirable phase of a woman's life, fully complete and at full phase once a man is present. When a woman is older, usually widowed, she is seen as losing all value to men. Older women are typically depicted as witches, evil and wicked, with nothing else to live for than to try and foil the mature woman's attempts at finding love with a man. It's a classic misogynistic trope in media. And while at first glance Millennium Actress seems to fall into this trope, it does something important to subvert it. It does so simply and elegantly by tying together all the phases of Chiyoko's life and layering them to construct her as a singular woman, all at once, flowing backwards and forwards and looping onto itself like a tape in the VCR. Ganya as a character is a vital piece in showing this. He, I think, sees Chiyoko as who she really is, and he sees her as a complete woman, a complete human being. Even when he comes up to her secluded house up in the mountains, he sees her not as an older woman who's diminished or wilted from what he remembers her as, but as the exact same woman he's loved and admired his whole adult life. Everything that made Chiyoko shine and glint and glimmer as a young woman still shines brilliantly in her silvered hair. Now as an old woman, she tells her story, and we realize as viewers that nothing's changed. I think this was the most important detail I took away from this film at the second viewing. Such a simple and minute detail, perhaps not even entirely intentional, that gave me the ability to understand my own womanhood, that tied myself together with the women in my life. Like layers of cell animation, all blending and constructing a singular image. It took the third viewing of this film for me to synthesize all of these things together and to be able to step back and look at all of it. The third time I watched Millennium Actress was very special. It's a memory that I want to keep with me forever. It was everything I wanted it to be, and I feel so grateful for the people I care about for making it possible. This most recent viewing was August 19th, Tuesday evening. The first time I get to see a Satoshi Kon film on a big screen. It was running in theaters on a limited release. The first time I could see Chiyoko as larger than life as she truly had always been. The first time I could fully immerse myself into her world, and the first time I could listen to Hirasawa-san's music as thunderously and brilliantly as I always hoped it to be. The theater was mostly empty. I'd estimate less than 15 people, and I'm being very generous. Yet to my left sat my loving partner Brad, and to my right, my best friend Elise. I was brimming with excitement and emotion before the film even started. I wanted the two people I love so much to feel the magic with me. I wanted to know that they felt it themselves, right? Even if it was just for 90 minutes, I wanted all of us to be carried away by Chiyoko's wind. To know that we'd all be running along side by side together. The ultimate scene in this film, Actress in Time Layers, at least that's what I'm calling it based on the title of the soundtrack that plays during the scene, is one of, if not my favorite 6 minutes in cinema. Chiyoko running towards the man that she loves with hope that he's still alive. He could still be out there, finally within reach. All of her fears, her anxieties, her past hesitations, all of it fades away. None of it matters anymore. She has to keep going. This is what her life has all been leading up to. Every layer of herself coalescing and coming together in this chase. You as the viewer running along with her, Satoshi Kon brilliantly expressing who Chiyoko is and what her chase means into something the audience can tangibly feel with her. We feel her footsteps as our own, and Hirasawa-san's music, Actress in Time Layers, is the perfect soundtrack for this experience. What exactly Chiyoko is chasing is up to a multitude of interpretations here. She's chasing romantic love, a love at first sight that dazzled her as a young girl, that propels her forward as she grows and matures, and that love ripens into a nostalgic yearning and panging as she grows into a mature woman. Or don't forget that the man that she meets as a young girl is an artist, so what she's truly chasing is art. Inspired and spurned on by his paintings, for her to go on and to create her own. Chasing the muse, chasing her desire for creative expression. Every artist has a relationship with their art, with their creative process. And that process is illustrated as the chase. Art isn't something that I can just sit down and perform perfectly at any time, anywhere, as long as I have the skill to do it. The creative process is often frustrating, often painful and elusive. It forces us to look at ourselves, be critical of ourselves, and to witness and embrace all the different aspects of who we are. It invites outside people to view our deepest and most tender parts of ourselves and allows them to critique them and challenge them. Artists grapple with our own self-worth constantly. Since I was a teenager, I've always had a skewed view of my own self-worth. I often think that my obstacles as an artist are the world around me, limiting my opportunities and just how many people I can share my art with. Yet, the true villain is my own fear. Chiyoko as an actress has to face who she is, her own doubts and criticisms, as well as the barriers that outside forces place in front of her. Yet, who was the one with the key to break down each and every barrier? It's Chiyoko herself. It always has been, and every time she trips, it's herself not ready to leap over the hurdles of her own fear. The old woman that curses her in the fiery castle isn't an evil witch at all. I mean, remember, she loves Chiyoko more than she can bear, and hates her more than she can bear. The old woman is Chiyoko, all of her doubts and her fears, and all of the times she sabotaged herself and her happiness. personified in her memory so that she can victimize that part of herself and separate herself from the ugly aspects of herself. Yet I think both her and the viewer come to see towards the end that that woman is an integral part of who she is. It's a part that each of us have. We need to embrace her, love her, and accept that we are both our own biggest champions and our own biggest villains. I met my partner Brad 2 years after my mother passed away. And those 2 years after she passed, I was forced to look at all of the ugliest parts of myself. My own fears, my own weaknesses, the parts of myself that allowed me to fall in love with abusive men that I knew were hurting me. I had to look at the parts of me that held me back from achieving my goals as an artist, that kept me in bed and away from creative opportunities and kept the pen out of my hand because I was afraid of failing, that I wasn't good enough, or that I didn't deserve success. When I stared into the face of my own white witch who wanted to set fire to everything in my life, I had to be honest with her. I had to accept her and embrace her. And instead of running away from her, I decided to take the time and show her that she was so much more than all of that. That she deserved happiness and love. The goals that seemed so far away, infinitely on the horizon, didn't have to weigh her down. The journey itself is so beautiful. The chase is what gives life its sweetness. I took the torch in her hand that wanted to burn everything to ash, and instead allowed it to light an ember of strength within me. I've allowed myself to be happy. I allow myself to take creative opportunities when they come to me, and trust that I'm ready for them. Trust that I can make the most of them. I work hard and create what I love, even if it isn't under a big studio or supported by a man with lots of money. I chose to break old habits in love and found a healthy and happy relationship with my partner. We are both the Ganya that the other deserves and needs, together propelling each other forward, supporting each other when we fall, and both of us reaching for the lofty clouds of tomorrow, while still savoring the sweetness of today.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, we'd love to hear from you.
Leave a comment, give us a like, and subscribe for more.
See you in the next episode.
Stay wicked!